All right, everyone. So David Shoemaker, a consulting producer for the Vince McMahon documentary on Netflix, talked on the Bill Simmons podcast about interviewing Vince. And so we're going to read you here from Inside the Ropes Wrestling. They have three different quotes they took from it, so we're going to read those for you. In the back of everyone's mind, even before the allegations came out, they probably knew that they were going to be logged into history for whatever they were saying. You're right about all that. All the stuff that's come before, all the other documentaries, part of what makes Vince a really difficult character and in some ways a really interesting character is his timeline and is inextricable from WWE. There's very little personal life there for us to go into because he and the company are entirely intertwined. So we do not tell a lot of the history of WWE, and a lot of it so we do tell a lot of the history of WWE, and a lot of it is you're staring down the history, the timeline, the big events that they're already laid out in the past. And in some ways, you're dependent on that. And you try to break free of that as much as possible, but really, it always comes back to Vince. And it always comes back to just hitting his version of events, him staring into the camera and trying to explain himself for the first time in his life, just to talk about himself this way for the first time that he's ever done a lot of times. So we'll stop there and then we'll read a little bit later more of it. But we're going to stop there for this one point because I think this actually is very telling. The reaction we've seen from the world has been this is kind of what we've already seen before. There's nothing new here. And as we brought up you can watch our review on it, as we brought up, we thought the new thing in this documentary was the addition of Vince McMahon. Okay, you have a Vince McMahon. I mean, certainly that when he was being interviewed, he still was, a part of the company. But you had a Vince McMahon who was giving you a more real look at everything, as he's being asked about different controversies and different things than ever before. And so I think David Shoemaker hits the nail on the head here is when people are saying, I've already seen this story before, well, that's because of, so I think that's a pretty key part of this, and I think Shoemaker hits it right in the head, is look, the story's the same because this is the same story. The documentary on the WWE may as well be a documentary on Vince McMahon's life because this was his life for so long. Okay, so we're going to go on to more. So this is from Shoemaker. I think that there's for everybody to see. It was a very unique experience. I mean, listen, I talk to people in WWE all the time, and they always ask, from the moment we started doing this, they would always ask me, what was it like to be in that room with Vince? Did he really sit there for 4 hours and just answer questions? He's never done it. The amount of access, just in terms of hours of him sitting still and asking questions, is entirely unprecedented, and a lot of that stuff's in there. You and I have seen all of the footage. We've seen so many cuts of this. I'm sure there's diehard wrestling fans that would just pay anything just to see the raw footage of Vince sitting there. It's the volume that is the amazing thing. We had 4 hours of Vince's interview on the cutting room floor because he sounded like a frog one day. He didn't have a voice. There was so much good material, but I think that the story that Chris and his team were able to tell is pretty amazing. So, like I said, this is what we talked about in our video yesterday is the part of this documentary that is new and is important and is, worth watching is Vince's perspective. And you could say they're lies or they're truths, whatever, right? If you think he's lying or telling the truth about these things. But even if he's telling lies about whatever, these scandals or how he truly felt about something, at least you, in that moment, you understand, okay, well, why would he lie like that? Why would he want to portray this version of himself? And that gives you information, right? Like to me, the biggest part of the whole thing was, or I don't want to say the biggest part of the whole thing, but one of the most interesting parts of the whole thing was when they talked about the difference between Vince McMahon and the character you see on screen, right? So the character you see on screen and him, who he is as a person. And Vince was clear that, listen, the guy that you see on screen is actually the guy I don't like. He's people that I have known in the past, these rich guys who, think they're better. I hate that person, right? That's kind of his view. And then they cut to other wrestlers, right, or people who worked in the business with him, whether it's Bruce Pritchard or whoever. And they have a complete opposite take on, they think that Vince McMahon, the character, is just Vince turned up to 1,000, right? They think that's who he is. And so why it was interesting to me is because it tells you a little bit about why Vince wanted this documentary made. And I think you could just see a different side of Vince as he's sitting there talking. You know, you could kind of see the difference between some of these interviews when he's getting attacked versus the one here. Right? During these interviews where he's getting attacked by the media, you know, he's aggressive and he's in their face and he's, you know, yelling. This one, he was really trying to come off as it's honestly the complete opposite of the character you see on screen with Vince McMahon, you know, and that to me is a very interesting part. Now, I don't know what the truth is because I've never met the guy, but, and I also think that the people they interviewed, is he like that, Vince McMahon? I think it may be a little bit misleading too, because I think they want you to believe that Vince personally is like the worst aspects, right? Like they in the documentary they put out all these very controversial things that the character Vince McMahon is doing, and they put those out there, and then they say, "Are you like that?" And Vince says, "No, I'm not." And these other people say, "Yes, he is," but they might be talking about other aspects, not necessarily the controversial ones, right? So I don't know how that was cut up or what how the questions were asked or anything like that. But I just thought this David Shoemaker going on the Bill Simmons podcast, it makes me feel a little bit, I don't want to say better, but it's good to know that the people who were involved in this thing, they actually understand. Like the view that people are having watching it, they understand it. You know, it's not like they wanted to portray this and everybody's you know, they think it's the opposite. Actually, they understand exactly what people were going to feel when they saw this, and I think people should focus on that instead of trying to focus on are there these bombshells that are gonna like you know blow my mind. Focus on the Vince portions of it, right? The interviews that he gives, because I think that is really the new material here, right? And I think they should the 4 hours. I don't know if they ever would, but they should put that out more. I mean, I think that's what people are interested in. I think people would almost rather see an interview, you know, that's spliced together like this with Vince McMahon than necessarily just you know replaying everything. And of course, I'm talking about 1 through 5, right? Six, that's completely different. That you might as well. That's a completely different documentary in a way because that's allegations and the investigation is ongoing, and this is all stuff that we don't even know about yet. So, and Vince has nothing to do with those in terms of an interview because he didn't, right? So he didn't give an interview over that stuff. But for 1 through 5, that is to me the major takeaway. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.